Hello, everybody, and welcome to our continuing work in a treatise on white magic. Um, this is commentary number 27 in that section where we're working with the rules for the astral plane. And we're on Rule 10, and we're doing the 11th program on Rule 10. It's a long rule, 170 pages or so. Well, anyway, we dealt with the fear of death. Now we're in the middle of the fear section because it's one of the most customary vibrations experienced on the astral plane. And as far as most people are concerned, it constitutes pretty much their dweller on the threshold, the great opposition or inhibition of their progress. Now, regarding, we're dealing with the fear of the future, and that is promoted by instinctive psychological thought habits. You know, somehow the memory or the pressure of ancient sufferings, dire memories, haunting miseries deep-seated in the subconscious rise to the surface frequently and cause a condition of fear and distress which no amount of reasoning seems to quiet. Then we went on to the flashes of prevision, and these are coming, they should come from the soul, and when the contact with the soul is firmly established and the consciousness of the knower is stabilized in the brain, then the prevision will carry no terror with it. But as DK tells us, the prevision seldom takes the form of forecasting happiness, and the reason is not far to seek. It's pretty much where we are as a human race. We are the prodigal son, and we're just waking up to the husks and the futility of earth life. Well, at that point, perhaps we're ready to listen to the Buddha's message, his four noble truths and the noble eightfold path. But usually the vista that we see through prevision is filled with worry, and it appears, as DK says here, black and forbidding, full of cataclysmic disaster. Well, we are reminded there is no death. There is only the entrance into wider life. So the prevision would be much enhanced if we could grasp the peace which comes from right human relations. So we ended here. We're on page 304 or so, and still with regard to the fear of the future, we have a mass of individual stress, distress, and fear. And let's see what he says about that. I had to stop there at an hour and a half. I would have liked to have gone on, but as I say, I do a bit of stealing time in order to make these programs possible. So, a mass of individual distress and fear can be taken on by an individual and yet have nothing to do with him whatsoever. It's an amazing thought how we appropriate, make our own what is current in the thought atmosphere, or maybe it should be more feeling atmosphere of humanity. It is quite possible for a man to tune in on the fears of other people whilst he himself has literally nothing to fear of any kind. So a keen discrimination is needed. You know, what is mine? What is yours? And maybe it's not quite so easy to to accomplish this, maybe not. He can so identify himself with their forebodings, especially at a time of such suffering on the earth due to climatic conditions and perpetual warfare and wrong political attitudes which take advantage of the people and steal from them, literally, economic inadequacy. He can so identify himself with their forebodings of future disaster that he interprets them in terms of his own coming experience. Well, let's say, we might say, let me make sure that it does show the tendency towards identification, at least that, because we become more sensitive and we begin one day to realize through the right kind of contemplation where subject and object merge that we are the other person and they are us. Everything that can be perceived is part of the great isness. It's part of the one and only being. Well, that becomes increasingly impressive as we move on in our development. But, in the beginning, we feel what the other person feels, and it may eventually will turn into sympathy and compassion and so forth. Yet, if he did but know it, let's see, if he did but know it, the future holds for him no hidden catastrophes. He is simply deluded, but the effect on his astral body and his solar plexus is identically the same. So, we're just insufficiently clear in our consciousness to tell the difference. This is painfully the case now that there are so many thousands of sensitive, aspiring souls inexperienced in handling the world karma. That's the point. We can be sensitive and yet lack sufficient experience to discriminate. Lacking sufficient experience to wide open to the suffering of others and unable to distinguish between their own destiny in the immediate future and the destiny of others. So this contributes to the fear of the future. It is possible also for the more advanced aspirant and those upon the path of discipleship to contact ancient vibrations of evil and misery on the astral plane. I think psychologists find this quite a bit. Evil long past and gone. And as some talk about it, the shells of karma long expiated. It is possible for them to read a tiny fragment of the Akashic records which concerns coming distress to an individual or a group, which they themselves may never see and yet nevertheless appropriate the conveyed information to themselves and suffer consequently. So keen discrimination is needed. And when identification takes place, one must be aware of it and not be swept by that which does not pertain to the individual himself. Well, maybe we all have some experience of this. There are some very stressful times when there are natural disasters. I'm thinking, all those people who were killed in mass shootings, uh, people who are destroyed by tsunamis and earthquakes, the terror of it. It is in the psychic atmosphere, and if we're sensitive, and now we have the mass communication system, we actually see the events as they took place. Then I think we are easy prey for this kind of intense impact. So, fear of death, I guess he's listing these maybe in order of their intensity. Fear of death and fear of the future. Now, here comes another one. I think, what were all these fears up here? Let's remind ourselves, if we can find them. I do want to find it, but maybe I'm not going to do it. Maybe it's not going to be so easy. Well, somewhere here are the different types of fears, and we will end up dealing with them one by one. One by one. All right, I'm not going to make this one of those fruitless hunts. But fear of pain, fear of physical pain, is another big one. Some people have this fear as the underlying cause of all their anxieties, little though they may recognize it. It is the result of the other three classes of fears, of the strain which they put upon their astral body and the tension caused by the use of the imaginative faculty and the reasoning tension in the nervous system. This system becomes very much oversensitized and capable of the most acute physical suffering, ills and ails, which seem of no vital importance to the ordinary, more phlegmatic types, maybe the earth type, the element earth, are aggravated into a condition of real agony. Oh, sorry. This should be recognized by those who care for the sick, and steps should be taken to minimize the physical condition through the use of sedatives and anesthetics. These kinds of things were discovered in the mid-19th century under the vibration of Neptune, I think. It removes you from the pain of acute impact, so that undue strain should not be put on an already overworked nervous system. Well, I keep on coming back to that episode, tremendously arresting episode in the cave with those young Thai boys. And in order to get them all out safely, they had to sedate them quite a bit in order to prevent further any panic attacks which could endanger them on the way out and endanger as well those who were the rescuers. You asked me whether I am endorsing the use of either of ether and chloroform in operations and of sedative drugs. Not basically, but temporarily. And I think they have a lot of other things now, compared to when this was written. I certainly remember the smell of ether, very unpleasant, I thought. When man's contact with his soul is firmly established, and when he has developed the faculty of passing in and out of his physical body at will, these helps will no longer be needed. So we can vacate our attachment to the nervous system and all the pain that might be caused if we were, as it were, in the body. So these palliatives, they may be regarded in the meantime as emergency measures necessitated by world karma and the point of evolution. We have only developed so much and not more. We're not there yet, and world karma holds us back from certain developments which otherwise we would be able to take advantage of. I am not, of course, referring to the use of narcotics and of drugs by hysterical and unbalanced people, but to the judicious use of ameliorants of pain under the wise guidance of the physician. Well, humanity's pain and suffering has been immense, and a lot of it has been physical pain and suffering, and so it's such a welcome relief. I'm thinking of dentistry. Think of what it was like before Novocaine, the cane. Novocaine came on the scene and other kinds of ameliorants. Really an agony. But I suppose a better agony than dying of some infection due to decay in the mouth, So we've really been through it as far as the form goes, and we remember those agonies. And now there is some relief, but some people are so sensitive to what they consider the harsh impacts of life that they use painkillers and narcotics and so forth as an escape from ordinary living, and thereby do not accomplish what they must in an incarnation. Never by escape do we accomplish what is set before us, a certain amount of karma to be expiated and certain things to be learned in conditions which may not seem so pleasant. Okay, so we add then to that the fear of physical pain, fear of death, fear of the future, I think, is it? Yeah. And the fear of physical pain, I guess most of the kinds of fears we will encounter are here. And then fear of failure. Okay. We'll take this one up next. So the next one is the fear of failure. I think it affects a lot of aspirants and disciples. This affects many people along many lines. The fear that one may fail to make good, the fear that we may not gain the love and admiration of those we love, the fear that others despise us or look down upon us, the fear that one may fail to see and grasp opportunity. These are all aspects of the fear complex, which colors the lives of so many worthy people. Fearing to make good, not gaining love and admiration, fearing that others despise us, the love of being loved, the second-ray problem or glamour, but I think pretty widely spread. The fear that others despise us or look down upon us. We haven't gained our own center of assurance. The fear that one may fail to see and grasp opportunity. These are all aspects of the fear complex of emotional mental energies, probably, very karma manasic. The fear complex, it is largely karma manasic. There it is. Maniacs. All right. This can be based upon an environment which is uncongenial and unappreciative, or an equipment which seems inadequate. Well, to which one of us does our equipment seem really adequate? Inadequate to its task, and in many cases has its root in the fact that a man is a disciple, or a really big soul ready to tread the probationary path. So we see that he rates those upon the path of probation rather highly. Okay. He has had a touch of soul contact. He has seen the vision and the possibility. I'm sure this is familiar to us. Then he looks at his personality and ranges it up alongside the work to be done and the quality of the people with whom that has brought him into contact. The result is an inferiority complex of a most powerful kind, because fed by real streams of force from above, causing the awareness of a great contrast. A great contrast between equipment and possible desirable attainment. Energy, we know, follows thought and is tinctured by the quality of that thought. So that's, we really have to understand that according to what we think, so energy will follow. The man turns a critical and disgusted eye upon his personality, and I'd say those of others, what I've observed is, especially if the Virgo energy is strong, but not exclusively that, of course. So he is not grateful. He is not content. He does not have gratitude, which Master Moria says conveys the best fires. So he turns a critical and disgusted eye upon his personality. What I've observed is when people do that, they tend to be very harshly critical of others too. And if they are satisfied, reasonably so, within themselves, of course, always higher attainment is possible, they will be less critical of others. Helpfully analytical, but not destructively critical. So the man turns a critical and disgusted eye upon his personality, and by so doing feeds the very things which he deplores, and thus renders himself still more inadequate to the task. In other words, he tears himself down. DK tells us that no one can really do good work under the heavy pressure of the feeling of inadequacy, self-loathing, inferiority complex, self-criticism. It is a vicious circle of effort and must be offset by a complete realization of the truth contained in the words, as a man thinketh, and it's often added, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. But then the heart is the soul, so it requires thinking related to the soul-infused mind. But quite naturally, and for all, as a man thinketh, so is he. As he dwells upon the nature of his omniscient soul, he becomes like that soul. See, DK tells us, look, if you want to love, be more loving, meditate upon love. So as he dwells upon the nature of his, well, relatively omniscient, I guess, but for all practical purposes omniscient, as he dwells upon the nature of his omniscient soul, he becomes like that soul. His thought is focused in the soul consciousness, and it becomes that soul in manifestation through the medium of personality, and the inferiority complex will lift, and he will achieve and see his achievement. This is but a very brief summation of the major fears which afflict humanity, and serves only to open up the subject and give opportunity for a few practical suggestions. I mean, DK knows that many treatises could be written on the subjects which he has essayed, but he's had to be economical in terms of time, and it was given during the interim between the world wars, and during the Second World War, so many difficulties would assail even his amanuensis. Just imagine Alice Bailey's health and her many duties and all that kind of thing presented limitations to him. He did the best he could, and it's an amazing outpouring. Fear of death, fear of the future, fear of physical pain, fear of failure, fear of death, fear of the future, fear of physical pain, fear of failure. Pause for a moment. If these are the most common types of fears, and even for aspirants and disciples, what is the most open door to fear in your life? Or does something of each one enter a little? Maybe you could rank them, So many of the aspirants and disciples I've met have that fear of failure, because they realize what might be possible if only their environment and their equipment would measure up. Okay, well, depression and its opposite pole, hilarity. Let me just see if I can find this. Depression. Oh, that's not what I want. I want this. So, one result. Maybe I should simply look up the word hilarity. All right, well, then that takes us to where we are. But over here are the factors which are most commonly found within the astral body. Fear is the first. Now we're going to take up depression and its opposite pole, hilarity. Then the desire for the satisfaction of the animal appetites. Its sub-diaphragmatic issues are involved here. Desire for happiness, more so than joy or bliss. And desire for liberation, a high type of desire. All right, here we are. So we're going to deal with number 2. And this one is, let's see, page 297. So I'll just say we're on 306 now. So note page 297. Depression. Master Moria speaks much of it and how every leader has to be aware of the contribution of the atmosphere to the changes in the mood of the people. Really, if you think about it, we really have to read both of those series, the Agni Yoga series and the Tibetan series. So the Tibetan is, in a way, a great deal representing Master K.H.'s ashram, and K.H. and M were the two who went before hierarchy, seeking to bring the ageless wisdom closer to humanity. Now, whether that was a debate arose and some were against it, but permission was granted. Did it work? Well, the burden is upon us, people like ourselves, to see whether it really did work. It's a great treasure, but humanity has an inclination to reject the reception of such a treasure because they are non-sacrificially holding on to things of lesser merit. So let's see what we have here. Number 2, depression or its opposite, polar opposite, hilarity. When we touch on the subject of depression, we are dealing with something so widespread that few escape its attacks. He does mention particularly Aquarius in this regard. The hill and valley experience. It is like a miasma, sort of a poisonous vapor, a fog which environs the man and makes it impossible for him to see clearly, walk surely, and cognize reality. It is part of the great astral illusion, and if this is grasped, it will become apparent why depression exists. For the cause of it is either astral or physical, and maybe depressive thoughts enter too, an incident to a world situation or a personal situation, great turbulence on the astral plane. Especially at this time, and I'm not sure that it has abated particularly. We've had opportunities. I wonder if we've taken advantage of those opportunities. We had a great clearing after World War II, but are we in the position of the man who swept his house clean of, what was it? Was it 40 devils? Was the number given? Quite a number of devils, and then later found himself in even worse condition because the devils had reinfested the house because of the inattentiveness, the non-vigilance of the man. So we're going to look here at study depression in individuals and look at its causes. I'm sure there's none of us who has not had a depressed day or two, or maybe a span of time. Sometimes astrology contributes to this, or unpleasant circumstances, and sometimes a lowering of the vitality, and sometimes simply the chemomonastic thoughts we think, these feeling-toned thoughts, which look with fear upon the future, or just in general fear and depression are very closely related. When a person is totally confident that there will be the achievement of that towards which he aspires most, depression is probably much rarer. And when we can see the way through, the light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how dark may be and difficult the circumstances, there is that light at the end of the tunnel. And you anticipate the coming happiness or joy. So anyway, what are the causes? The world glamour. That's a big one. He wouldn't have written the book and had the group if it were not really a big problem. This sweeps an isolated unit otherwise free from individual conditions producing depression into the depths of world reaction. Again, lack of discrimination. This world glamour, with its devitalizing and depressing results, has its roots in various factors which we have only time to briefly mention. But, there is a great vampiristic thought form hovering above humanity, we are told, and it really does devitalize and depress if one does not discriminate it and if one gives in to it. And it's very powerful, and it attracts people with false allure, and so they give in to it. And when they awaken, a long time later, they've been drained. So what are some of these factors? Well, astrological factors, either affecting the planetary chart and hence individuals, or primarily racial. And these two factors are often overlooked. Well, subtle energies, astrological energies coming in and cyclically. I suppose if we're under a heavy Saturn-Pluto cycle, things can look dark, and maybe Jupiter and Neptune will give us something different, although Neptune can be super sensitive. Anyway, this has much to do with the planetary horoscope. And about that planetary horoscope, we really don't know much at this time. All right, what else? So let's just note these. He begins with some fairly abstruse ones, doesn't he? Hidden factors. The path of the sun in the heavens. The southern path tends to a lowered vibratory influence, and aspirants should bear this in mind in autumn and early winter months, and this relates to those who live in the northern hemisphere. So the southern path would be the summer path for those south of the equator, and quite in the temperate zones south of the equator. But what do we have? I forget what it's called. It's based oftentimes on depression, based on light deprivation, and certain ameliorative lights are brought in to help. But I suppose there's even deeper energies involved. I mean, when you think about Capricorn, it can be one of the most depressive signs. A lot of people with Capricorn, Cancer too, their mouth does turn down. If you look physiognomically at that, you'll see it. However, it can be such a sign of exaltation as well. So the opposites are always being found. The path of the sun in the heavens. Okay, he's beginning with subtle factors. The dark half of the moon, or the period towards the end of the waning moon, and the early new moon, this, as you well know, affects meditation work. Well, there's a lot of occult lore about the dark of the moon, you know, and the sort of negative occultism associated with it. But basically, if you know what you are doing, you can use any part of a cycle. Dane Rudyard wrote this book on the lunation cycle. Very good one, and I think maybe 8 different phases are given. Sort of the new moon and the first quarter and the waxing first quarter leading up to the full moon, and then kind of a gibbous moon and third quarter, and then again the waning moon. And these can be correlated with the astrological signs as well. I mean, you think of the masters and how when they undertake to do something, they have to be aware of all of these cycles, which either support or do not support their intention. Many, many hidden factors, which we blissfully ignore and begin things injudiciously, and thereby doom our efforts to failure. So, you know, we've had some fairly astrological, heavenly causes here of depression. Now we're getting right down into the psyche. Psychological factors and mass inhibitions due undoubtedly to forces external to the planet and to plans obscure in their intent ordinary humanity. So people just don't accomplish what they want because of subtle external influences. We might say, whoop, no. As always, problem. The condition of the psyche of humanity. I'm recalling DK said, well, look, you know, the masters were anxious that the war, Second World War, didn't go on too long because humanity would be just physically and psychologically exhausted, and a very dangerous condition could ensue. I think after World War I, was it 50 million people died of the Spanish flu? Was it that many? It was millions, and not an insignificant number of millions. And that's probably due to the great, lowering of resistance and the depletion of the immune system through all kinds of psychological factors. These forces, in other words, positivity boosts the immune system, and negativity obviously suppresses it. These forces playing upon the human race affect the most sensitive. They, in their turn, affect the environment, and gradually a momentum is established which sweeps through a race or nation, through a period or a cycle of years, and produces conditions of profound depression and mutual distrust. Well, when you're afraid you can't accomplish something, when you have a gloomy outlook, you tend to look at the people in your environment as contributing to that negative prognosis. It causes a sad self-absorption, and this we term a panic or a wave of unrest. One can only think about, well, there have been various stock market crashes, of 29 and maybe I think one in the early 90s, and another one. Well, there have been, these vicissitudes, and so many people lost their living and their future, and they call these things panics. People jumping out of windows because they could see no possibility for themselves and so forth. The fact that the working out may be military, economic, social, or political, that it may take the form of a war. Did this contribute to the Second World War? Of a religious inquisition? How much fear was behind that? The fear that the church was being undermined by various heresies, that it was losing its power. Thus, the Counter Reformation came into existence with its heavy and very sadistic inquisition. That it may take the form of war, religious inquisition, of financial stringency, or international distrust is incidental. Well, I don't think you get very good things out of a depressed psyche. The causes lie back in the blueprints of the evolutionary process and are governed, even if unrealized, by the good law. So high energies may be knocking, but our equipment is inadequate to handle them. And well, when we feel confident that we can handle what is thrown at us horizontally or below or from above, we tend to remain positive. But when the prognosis, the anticipation, is filled with dread and negativity, this creates a feedback loop involving depression and more fear. So it's at times like that when we really have to realize who we are, and the confidence in the inner immortal deity has to take over and become that upon which we rely. I'm sure you've all gone through tough times, and how did you get through? Did someone give you a hand, maybe? Or did the hand come from within your own nature? And did a new energy arise so you could, in fact, apply spiritual energy related to your own truer inner identity to the outer difficulties? Maybe that happened for you. So we have to learn how to handle the vicissitudes of psychological change in humanity, with many causes, some of them very subtle and some of them maybe more obvious. I'm sure DK talks about the stress and the strain and the depression experienced by those who went through the war or wars. And I feel it was particularly acute in the Second World War. Somehow the populations who were not soldiers were suffering even more. And there were less dedicated, battlefields than in the First World War. So when this psychological strain comes along, it can work out in various ways. There's always got to be, we had in the world in the 30s a Great Depression. How did we get out of it? War, basically. There was a rising up, a building, an ambition in certain countries. Germany felt it had been stabbed in the back and it named the perpetrators and then sought to avenge itself against them. So people forgot their depression in a military Martian buildup, which exalted the sense of their own identity, Deutschland über alles, Germany above everything, above all, the master race, the revival of the ancient past. I mean, that's kind of where you have to be careful with depression. Japan wanted to revive the samurai, and Italy wanted to revive Rome, trying to get out of that feeling of worthlessness and psychological gloom. They chose the military option. And there's all kinds of other things that could happen as well. I think Roosevelt led America into an economic revival through the New Deal and a social revival, and only incidentally got engaged in the war. It was not a warlike effort that pulled America out of its particular depression. So it's a reaction against this psychological suppression and heaviness. Now, what are we looking at here? We're looking at various factors, the world glamour. We're looking at, the roots of the world glamour. Okay. The isolated unit is swept along, otherwise free from individual conditions producing depression, into the depths of world reaction. This world glamour, with its devitalizing and depressing results, has its roots in various factors: astrological factors, the path of the sun, the dark part of the moon, dark half of the moon, psychological factors. And now, here is a major factor which afflicts the great majority of human beings: astral polarization. We are not yet out of the Atlantean period in terms of consciousness. Maybe we are in the Aryan race, but how many are truly in consciousness, the mentally focused Aryans? It has nothing to do with the kind of racial connotations that Hitler put upon it. The Aryans are found everywhere according to the nature of and clarity of their minds and the way their consciousness is polarized. So I just want to make sure that I'm grasping this correctly. Depression and its opposite pole, hilarity. And what are the causes? The world glamour, with various causes within itself, and also astral polarization contributing to world glamour. Just as long as a man identifies himself with his emotional body, just as long as he interprets life in terms of his moods and feelings, just as long as he reacts to desire, not just responds but reacts, just so long will he have his moments of despair, of darkness, of doubt, of dire distress, and of depression. It's wonderful how DK uses these mnemonics, which all associated words begin with the same letter, and then you tend to remember, right? I always kind of remember discipline, dispassion, discrimination, decentralization, detachment. Those are 5 Ds, showing how to master the various vehicles from the bottom up. And now we have despair, darkness, doubt, dire distress, and depression. It's a good mnemonic, and It all comes from astral identification, but here's the problem. The majority of human beings are astrally identified. And that's even though we are in the Aryan race solidly for some million years. I mean, the fifth root race. And now we're in the Aryan part of it. Well, all of these negative conditions, and we've got to be honest, I know we've had our moments with all of these, they are due to delusion, to the glamour of the astral plane, which distorts, reverses, and deceives. There's a bunch of D's, you know. The number is 4, perhaps. It has to do with the pairs of opposites and their contrast, high and low, side to side, but also with conditions on the 4th sublevel of the personality, working out, emotions, working out in negative ways. So I just want to, I'm just amazed how many D's we're getting: delusion, distortion, and deception. 8 D's already. Have to watch those things because Master DK teaches many ways. 8 D's. There's no need to dwell on this. If there is one factor aspirants recognize, it is the need of freeing themselves from the great illusion, as is particularly found upon the astral plane. Arjuna knew this, yet succumbed to despair. So sometimes reasoning, knowing is not enough to transform the reactions of the astral body. He tells us this, the types of fears that just don't yield to reason. Arjuna knew this, yet succumbed to despair, yet in his hour of need, Krishna, the soul, right, failed him not, but laid down in the Gita the simple rules whereby depression and doubt can be overcome. And so I look ahead, maybe with a little bit of foreboding, yet knowing the necessity of it. When you have so much Pluto that is required before Christ can reappear, you're going to go dredging amidst the unseen negativity of humanity. And during the next 7 years before the hierarchical conclave, I think there's going to be a lot of dredging. And it's going to throw things in our face that we thought we maybe had long overcome. But okay, there are ways to deal with this, and DK is giving us these ways. So this is rules for overcoming depression and negativity in general. Know thyself to be the undying one. Well, discover the inner God, the immortal one, and identify as that deity. Know thyself to be the undying one. Confidence in immortality does a lot to chase away depression, because you'll always have another chance and you'll get it right, and you have to get it right. So there's a confidence in the goodness of the eventual outcome. Control thy mind, for through that mind the undying one can be known. This is really occultism. Not through the feeling. so much as through the mind. The knowledge of divinity. Learn that the form is but the veil which hides the splendor of divinity, so right assessment of the importance of the relative importance. Whoops. Right. Sorry. Of the okay. RLT. Let's see. RLT. Relative. Relative importance of the various vehicles. So we don't overvalue the lower parts of ourselves and undervalue the higher aspects of our nature. So learn that the form is but the veil which hides the splendor of divinity. And by the way, I'm a bit over the hour, so I'm just going to persist for the moment if I can, and I could be interrupted at any time. And if so, well, we'll just call it. Probably these are not going to be broadcast on prime time where the timing of an episode is of the utmost importance. Realize that the one life pervades all forms so that there is no death, no distress, no separation, but at least find the indications, the presence of the one life, the presence. So it can be a great abstraction in our view. On the other hand, if we really find it and sense its infusion of all things, then it becomes really effective. That knowledge that the one life pervades all, because it's something which has been registered. Detach thyself, therefore, from the form side and come to me. It's very much like what the Buddhas spoke, but probably much, much older. The original battle of Kurukshetra, some say it was about 4 million years ago on a plain south of Delhi. Detach thyself, therefore, from the form side and come to me, Krishna, the soul, the true identity. So dwelling in the place where light and life are found, thus illusion ends. So what? Repolarize and find our identity. O-I-D-N-T. Is that it? Well, that's identification. I-D-N. That's identification. I-D-T. Well, I've got to find it. A word like identity, identity is just ID. Okay. Find our identity in a higher point of tension than customary. Okay. Now I just have to highlight all these. Obviously, they're so important. And know thyself to be the undying one. Control thy mind. Learn the form is but a veil. Realize that the one life pervades all forms, and detach thyself from the form side, and I suppose identify. Identify as the one life. Identify as the immortal one life. Now that sounds easy, but you can spend your lifetime or more doing it. So it is his astral polarization which lays a man open to his many, emotional reactions into waves of mass feeling of any kind. So let's just say astral polarization leads to instability. Instability of mood and the inability to sustain right happiness. This is the cause of his being swept into a vortex of uncontrolled energy and misdirected emotional force, which eventuates in a world war, a financial panic, a religious revival, or a lynching. Whoa. What, of course, there were those lynchings going on when this was written, and now maybe not so much, but there are psychological lynchings occurring. And they don't only afflict the black race, but they afflict others who try to advance humanity along the right lines. So look at all these equivalences. A world war, there's something called war fever or war hysteria. People are getting swept along and they think that this war is a wonderful, glorious thing, and they're going to claim on the battlefield and through their successful return something they call glory. Well, glory exists at the third initiation. It's not going to be found in its true sense, usually anyway, on the battlefield. A financial panic, people are swept. They don't even know, they stop thinking. A religious revival, well, are you going to accept Jesus as your Lord or whomever? And you get swept by the emotion of the group, and then without really thinking of what they are doing, they grab some poor soul and tie him up to a tree, lynching. Strange fruit, Billie Holiday, was it? So those horrible things have happened, and there's some kind of mass, uncontrolled energy, fervency, misdirected emotional force, oftentimes with such a negative result. It is this also, this uncontrolled energy and misdirected emotional force, which raises him to the heights of hilarity and of spurious happiness, in which the light deceptive of the astral plane uncovers to him false sources of amusement or the mass hilarity owing to his sensitivity, and sweeps him into a condition which finds its vent in this is quite an analysis, in unrestrained merriment, and which is the opposite pole of unrestrained weeping. This is wonderful analysis of what hilarity really is. Spurious happiness, in which the light deceptive of the astral plane, the will-o'-the-wisp, uncovers to him false sources of amusement. All you have to do is turn on your television, and there are these various shows with panels and sort of humorous celebrities, well-known people, and the laughter is constant, and the joking is constant. False sources of amusement, and owing to his sensitivity, it sweeps him into that hysterical condition, which finds its vent in unrestrained merriment, and which is the opposite pole of unrestrained weeping. Have you ever had, I know I have, I've had circumstances in which laughter has come upon me, and it's been hard to break. I was just swept by the laughter, unable to stop laughing. Why? Well, maybe this tells something. Sometimes I saw I've seen some movies where this transformation actually is well displayed. Unrestrained merriment becomes unrestrained weeping. So keep the middle path and avoid the extremes. I mean, obviously, DK is analyzing this from a certain distance in years, since he probably participated in it. I guess we all do at some point. I refer not here to true merriment, nor to the proper sense of humor, but to those hysterical outbreaks of hilarity which are so common among the rank and file of humanity and lead to reactions of fatigue. Well, you see how careful he has to be with his sense of balance, because there are a lot of pilgrims walking around like grim pills. They think that not to smile, not to talk, not to laugh, not to see humor is somehow a sign of spirituality. So he has to be really careful in contrasting the false and the true, so people realize that the true does exist. And when you're a teacher, many of us are, you say something strongly. Make sure the balance is there so people do not misinterpret and simply overemphasize something and create a distortion in their life. I've witnessed a couple of things. I once witnessed a great invocation spoken by a group that was so ferocious, is all I can say, almost screamed. The leader of the group had bad health problems, and he was desperate to survive and all that. Maybe that affected the group, but it was such an ugly sight. I still have to remember it, and I've seen groups come up and be so deadly serious that clearly an imbalance was being indicated, and they thought they were being super spiritual by not allowing one fragment of humor to enter. But I guess live and learn, We are eager for achievement. And as a result, we tend to place undue emphasis. The ray of undue emphasis is the sixth ray. We tend to place undue emphasis upon just one factor when there are really two in a more balanced situation. So we have this basic question about the world glamour with its devitalizing and depressing results. The inner astrology of it, the tendency of man to be astrally polarized. What else? What else contributes to this susceptibility? A devitalized condition of the physical body. I remember once reading from Manly Hall, and at the time I couldn't get it. It says, why are people unhappy? Because they lack vitality, he said. But more and more I see that to be the case, because vitality has a natural radiation which is protective and doesn't allow in many kinds of devitalizing influences. So a devitalized condition of the physical body, and this is due to various causes. I mean, when if your physical body is dragging along, you just can't accomplish certain things, and your astral body is pressing you towards accomplishment, and the contrast between what you want and what you can do is very frictional and can lead to the psychologically depressive reaction, oh, I'll never achieve this, even though I want to. So a depleted etheric or vital body, physical disease, either inherent or brought over from another life, accidental or due to wrong emotional reactions, or produced as a result of group karma, such as an epidemic. So, these cause that devitalize. what did he say to some of his students? Well, he said, okay, I could wish you were younger and more courageous. But he also talked about the general devitalized condition of some of his students, maybe many of them. They were being subjected to so many energy currents, and those on the path of negativity were warring militantly against the aspirant. So really, the aspirant, the disciple, is really in a cross current of many factors. And can he handle those, or will they lead to a frictional devitalization? So physical disease contributes to devitalization. I'm sure, this is the lot of all human beings. We know it. And atmospheric, and I mentioned that in terms of Master Moria, how aware of the atmosphere, he said, the leader has to be. This is sometimes overlooked, but the condition of the atmosphere, the nature of the climate, the density, humidity, or dryness, the heat or cold have a definite effect upon psychological outlook. So, in our attempt to fight world glamour, we have to be aware of some subtle factors, and even the weather. I think we know it. There are days when there just is not a lot of vitality available because of very humid, moist conditions, let's say. And let's just say that different environments have contributed to the shaping of different cultures. I just want to make sure that I'm being very clear here. So the next one was depression and its opposite or its opposite pole, hilarity. That's basically what we've been dealing with in terms of rounding up the causes. And the world glamour, with all its subtle causes, and the astral polarization. I mean, if the moods are constantly going from high to low, it's very hard to maintain a stable and detached point of view. And also, what else? Devitalized condition. Right. So, glamour. And I'd like not to be forgetting astral polarization. Devitalization. All of these all contribute to depression and consequently to hilarity, which is a false, superficial, unthinking kind of happiness which drains the individual and devitalizes and makes the opposite reaction into depression almost inevitable. You will find, if you study, that and that's the thing, if we study, I know things are changing, and a lot of people have attention deficit disorder. They want everything immediately in terms of a picture and a fast one. But here is the opportunity with Master DK's work to ponder deeply. And am I old-fashioned in thinking that this is a good thing to do? Certainly we cannot approach his work and that of Blavatsky unless we're really willing to ponder. You will find, if you study, that all subsidiary and temporary causes of depression and its opposite can be grouped under one of these three heads. And when one has ascertained the cause, the cures will become apparent. So the general glamour, I think that's one of them. The world glamour. Yeah. Tend to forget, even a few pages ahead. Astral polarization and a devitalized condition of the physical body. And I think I should devitalization of the physical body. All contribute to depression and consequently to that reversal, that reaction we call polarity. So again, you will find, if you study, that all subsidiary and temporary causes of depression and its opposite can be grouped under one of these three as we have right above us here. And then we have to ascertain the cause, and then the cure can be forthcoming. I'm going to make these really big. All right. I have dealt somewhat at length with the two first manifestations of astral force. Fear of death, of the future, of suffering. That's, I think he called it physical pain, of failure, and the many lesser fears to which humanity is subject. A good teacher will always sum up and anticipate. What am I going to say? I'll say it, and then what did I say? All of those things help the assimilating student to really take in what must be taken in. And depression. So let's make fear really big. Okay, that's fear. And here's depression at number 24. Whoop, not that way. Okay. So, because these two fears, and he's calling depression a kind of fear, right? Constitute for man the dweller on the threshold in this age and cycle. Fear and depression. Fear and depression are essentially the dweller on the threshold. Now, both of them indicate sentient reaction to psychological factors and cannot be dealt with by the use of another factor such as courage. Well, at least you can go against retreat. At least you can go against retreat, but not solve the root problem. Okay. They must be met by the omniscience of the soul working through the mind, not by its omnipotence. This is so important. The omniscience will cure these things, and not by overpowering. Okay, so not by its omnipotence. Oop, come on. Okay, so there's an occult hint, you bet. Here. Not by overpowering. So understanding is liberative. Knowledge. Oop. Let's go back there. Knowledge, understanding, and wisdom must be used to alleviate fear and depression. Well, think of it, we are struggling. We've been given a great teaching. We see the dire condition of humanity. We've been warned of delay and even disaster. that the whole human experiment might have to be attempted again to see if some proper race of human beings might not be raised up. That's a loss of a lot of millions of years. So we've also been given the method, which is knowledge, understanding, wisdom, more along the second aspect rather than the first. So not so much should we use the first aspect. That would be just forcing with no final change. I shall not deal with the other factors listed, such as the desire for happiness, for the satisfaction of animal appetites, and for liberation, for these do not constitute the majority, for the majority of the problem, as is the first two. Now that's interesting. I thought he was going to deal with those. Okay, but he is being practical and he's under the law of economy and he has to really, his instrument. Some days Alice Bailey had too much concrete menace and was not, her mind was not fit to take down his recording. There may have been illness on other days. He had to be very careful with his instrument. He knew the time limits. He knew the vast amount of material he had to condense basically into an ABC 1, 2, 3 kind of format. He's giving us outlines, even though they seem for us very, complete and demanding in certain ways. One could write at length on the manifestation and the cause of all these. But when fear and depression are overcome, the race will enter into its heritage of happiness, of true satisfaction, of which the cravings above indicated are but the symbols, and of liberation. Well, liberation will come. The desire for it is usually found, in higher disciples and initiates and so forth, just as long as it doesn't become selfish. So let us deal with the basic evils first. Once they have been dominated, all that remains is right orientation and polarization in the soul. And the soul will instruct and the soul will guide, and we will succeed in understanding and dealing with the desire for happiness, for the satisfaction of animal appetites, the desire for liberation, and so forth. We will succeed. So overcome, whoopsie. Okay. First overcome the most threatening and difficult. DF. Okay. Again, I want to see how to spell difficult. DF. Difficult. DFCL. The most difficult. Overcome first. The most difficult. Now, it looks like we're entering a new section. We will next consider the overcoming of wrong vibration in the astral body and the use of astral energy in the right direction. So I'm going to pause there after an hour and a half here, and I'm going to, go up here and try to bring down that which is needed to orient us and tell us where we are. Right. And finally, where are we? We've accomplished, covered a fair amount here. Fear and depression. Let's think about it. To what extent are we dealing with these miasmas? But you know what? I can see that the right use of energy comes next. So actually, I'm going to just try to go all that way, really. So this is 304, page 304 to 311. And we'll begin here, and this is the 20th of August. And we'll start at 311. Right. And this will be, we're finishing up with number 10. And here we are starting number 12. So let me, even though I've reached the hour-and-a-half point, let me just at least finish this section. We have been dealing at length with the subject of the astral or sentient body, his preferred term, and have considered the various wrong ways in which it makes its presence felt. It is, after all, the main vehicle to overcome. On our planet and in our solar system, it is overcome, generally, but on our planet particularly, and within the equipment of man, humanity vibrates primarily in one or other of these ways, and the sentient body of the average human being is scarcely ever free from some mood, some fear, some excitement. Whoopsie, that's no good. Right. I think it's better for me to do it this way. Whoa. Okay. The placidity. The necessary placidity is not present. This has provided a condition whereby the solar plexus center is abnormally developed. When he gave an assessment of the very first disciple in the discipleship book, the solar plexus was wide open. The man was a third-ray soul, sixth-ray personality, sixth-ray astral, but the solar plexus was open far beyond the other vehicles, and thus it is, I think, with most people. In the bulk of humanity, the sacral center and the solar plexus govern the life, and that is why desire for material living and for the sex life are so closely blended. Well, that's what we have reached. That's where we are. And we have to face that and realize as we try to teach and spread the knowledge of the ageless wisdom what we're dealing with. There are many people who for a long time will not be ready for the ageless wisdom. The solar plexus in the animal is the brain and governs all the instinctual reactions, but is not so closely allied with the purely sex expression as in the case of the human being. I guess the instinctual nature expresses when it can and should, but in the human being, the thought life has linked the thought life of the human being in Kamamanus has linked the astral, the solar plexus and sacral. What is it? Sacral center. And SACC. Okay. Yeah, has linked the sacral center with. So there's some kind of perversion going on there and a distortion probably inevitable because of the thinking power of man. When the brain is becoming sensitive to the awakening mind and is not so entirely occupied with the mechanism which registers sensory impression, we shall have the orientation which will eventually raise the consciousness into those centers above the diaphragm. So this depends on the functioning of the brain and its responsiveness to the mind rather than strictly to the senses. The solar plexus will then again be relegated to its old function as a directing agent of purely instinctual animal life. And artificial, it will not be so involved with artificial desire, which in Atlantean days apparently reached undreamt of heights. You know, the desire for things that way out of proportion, extreme luxury, and so forth. For the advanced pupil in the world, the solar plexus is largely the organ of psychic sensitivity and will remain so until the higher powers supersede the lower and man functions as a soul. And I think what we're talking about there is advanced psychism, involving the Ajna center. So for the advanced pupil, the solar plexus is largely the organ of psychic sensitivity, and usually, at first, with much distortion, and will remain so until the higher psychic powers supersede the lower. Okay. Then the sensory life will drop below the threshold of consciousness, and the solar plexus is involved with the sympathetic nervous system as part of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, well, that will take us to the place where I think we need to be right now. And since we're beginning an entirely new section on the right use of energy, I think it's well to stop. We've dealt with fear and depression, and later he's going to deal with the overcoming of fears. And we've been given in the Bhagavad Gita that wonderful section on how to overcome depression. Know thyself to be the undying one. Okay, let's wait for review. Control the mind, because through the divinely or spiritually infused mind, the one can be known. Learn that form is but a veil. Realize that one life pervades all forms, and detach thyself, therefore, from the form side of life. And, well, it requires a review. How should we overcome depression? Maybe when we are feeling, as he says, when our point of tension is lower than it should be, we enter into these 5 steps from the Bhagavad Gita. And later he'll give us some very interesting alignment exercises that will allow us to overcome the fear. So our next work is with the right use of energy. And we'll make it really big to begin with. And that will be, we'll begin with number 12, page 311. It's a slog, isn't it? You know, how we have to carefully and persistently go through the great treasure which has been released to us. But at least it will be the beginning of, well, what will end up with kind of a planetary omniscience. And that omniscience is so powerful when we have to overcome these negative states and not just overpower them, through the will. They must be met. They must be met. These psychological factors by the omniscience of the soul working through the mind, and not by the omnipotence of the soul, well, or the omnipotence of the monad and its consciousness. One day, maybe in the next solar system, the full power of the will be released, but we have not yet developed the full power, the consciousness powers of the soul. And that is what is called for next. So when you look at what Master DK has given, we've been given wonderful soul training. We've been given a great deal of history of the planet and the cosmology and cosmogony and many scientific facts in the secret doctrine. And the first presentation in which he was involved, he became a master in 1875, when the Theosophical Society was being founded. And that great book was coming out, I think, in the 1880s early. And then the more psychological approach given in A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, which was then developed into many books, came with the Alice Bailey presentation. I can only imagine what Alice Bailey must have felt when she was being dictated to with the material in A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, how not to be overwhelmed. But then he broke it out and made it more concrete and apparently more practical. And we have been able to use that and still not used it entirely. And then, the synthesis of his three-part presentation and all the treatises involved has not yet been achieved. And the students of the future who are in a position to receive not only the completion of his third installment, but the entire second installment and the first installment, working with Blavatsky, will be in a position to really understand a great synthesis of occult knowledge. And then maybe the bridging that is to be accomplished by these treatises will be in place. And students of our type and thinking people looking for causes will be ready for the Aquarian age beginning in 2117. So we're still in the middle of it. The Seed Group project is 275 years, and the year 2200 is seeing the conclusion of that project. We cannot foresee all that will, well, not even a fragment of what will transpire during the Aquarian age and what the hierarchy has in mind. But we do know that Saturn, Mercury, and Venus will be very powerful, and all of the air signs and the lords of liberation will be active, and there will be liberty, equality, and fraternity, all active, and great things are possible for humanity compared to its dire past, in which it has, as Master DK said, grievously erred. I'm sure we've all been part of that grievous erring and can now make good in some way. Well, it's just one universe right now out of unspecifiable number. And we're living in the eternal now as much as we can, because really there's no other choice. That eternal now is forever. It's always been, and every universe has been infinitely preceded. Every universe. Begin to wonder whether succession and sequence are even possible. But then that would be a bit of a diversion. Suffice it to say, we have the moment. We have something of the divine plan. We know that a divine purpose exists. We're very limited right now on our tiny little planet, but increasingly the unveiling will occur, and eventually we will be restored to that particular infinitesimal that we call the universal logos. And then the restoration will be complete when the universe is over. only to extrude another, unique in its own way. And we cannot help but be the subject and the object of every universe, as we always have been. But that's a bit of a digression, and I guess maybe it comes from participating in Francis Donald's Secret Doctrine presentation, wonderful, last night, and Blavatsky's great and capacious writings. Okay, many blessings, lots of love. We'll see you before long.